Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this great event that we're going to have today. I'm Dick Morningstar. I'm the founding chairman of the Global Energy Center here at the Atlantic Council, and formally, among other things, our ambassador to the European Union. I might say once upon a time. It's been been a long time ago that I was doing that, but it's a pleasure to be opening this fireside chat with my very good friend, His Excellency Václav Bartuška, the Ambassador-at-Large for Energy Security for the Czech Republic. Ambassador Bartuška has been in that position since 2006. And I think we started working together, Václav, in 2009. And you have been an exceptionally good friend, one to me, but also, and more importantly, to the United States and to the Atlantic Council. And it's particularly appropriate to have you during this very difficult time where we need to emphasize the importance of unity within Europe during the present energy crisis and the Ukraine war, as well as transatlantic cooperation. I think that, and also I should mention that this is also the president where the Czech Republic has the presidency of the European Union during this semester and can guide the discussions on energy. And there have been some very important discussions in Brussels this week and with the Energy Council next week to talk about how to deal with the shortfall of gas and looking at things such as price caps on gas and the like, which I know that Václav will be talking about. I think that there are two major lessons that we have learned from this crisis. One is that once and for all, Europe needs to wean itself forever from Russian energy. Maybe at some point they'll be getting some, but they can no longer ever again be dependent on Russian energy. And both Václav and I were proponents of this view going back to when we started working together in 2009. And the Czech Republic and other Central and Eastern European countries have been at the forefront of understanding this and pushing for energy independence for Europe. And I know, and Olga will be talking with Ambassador Bartuška today more about that. The other lesson that I think is important is that gas and fossil fuels, at least for the short to midterm, are going to continue to be important. But we also have to recognize that gas, for example, which is so important to European energy security, it's not an either-or proposition with the green transition. We have to have both gas in the short term, but also continue to double down on new green technologies because the green transition will actually further energy security, reduce dependence on fossil fuels, and reduce any lingering dependence that countries may feel towards Russia. So all of this is going to be critically important. Major decisions will take place in the next few days. It's going to be great to hear about that and how you predict, Václav, they will turn out. And again, to emphasize the need for transatlantic cooperation. You've heard enough from me. Let me turn it over to Olga Kakova, our Deputy Director for European Energy Security. She is just fantastic and is now our icon on European energy security. And she'll be doing the fireside chat with my friend Václav, Ambassador Bartuška. I wish I were there in person with you. Olga, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Ambassador Bartuška, it's just such an honor to have you here today. What a time in the energy markets. It's such an important week, and particularly going into the meetings that are happening this week and next week. Lots of changes. EU is rolling out multiple solutions to address the energy crisis. Some of them revolved around reducing volatility, profit sharing, making sure that some of those record skyrocket profits go back to the energy consumers. Also looking at reducing waste and risks around collateral as utilities and different companies are purchasing into the future. And of course, price caps are at top of the discussion right now as well. There are two main concerns right now with some of the changes that are being proposed. Will these changes discourage efficiency measures or different behaviors on the both industrial side and on the consumer side? Will they discourage people making adjustments and trying to find ways to reduce their energy use? And the second one, of course, is on particularly relevant to the price cap conversation, is will they discourage supply flows to Europe? Will a certain price ceiling discourage supplies to Europe? Okay. So I'm starting off with an easy question for you today. So.
First of all, good morning to you, good morning to, and thank you to Ambassador Morningstar for the introduction. It's nice to be back at Atlantic Council. Thank you for the invitation. We have at the moment ahead of us 3 difficult winters. We have to get through them without most of the European governments falling down. So the measures we're taking are emergency measures, no doubt about it. The price cap is, of course, in a way, indirect tax. You basically guarantee a certain level of prices, maximum prices for the customers, both households and companies. Mm-hmm. And the difference is paid for by the state, which then gets the money from the windfall tax from the rich companies. So that's something that's being agreed on at the European level. We have to still figure out the details, but that's what's going to be done. That's a short-term measure, which will help us, hopefully, to survive the difficulties of the coming winters without governments falling apart. That's the reason. As for the supply of gas to Europe, we do have a second step, which I think will only be worth to undertake in the spring of next year once we get through the winter. Because we do talk to the suppliers. I've been actually in the US right now to talk to some of these suppliers as well. We talk to Qataris, Norwegians, Nigerians, Algerians, many other countries. And they all understand that Europe is at the moment with its back towards the wall. So there is no point in negotiating at the moment any long-term contracts because simply we do not have alternatives. Mm-hmm. We will come back in spring of next year after we get through this winter with a very simple message, which will be, look, there's behind me a mountain of coal, which is of course bad, but I can burn it and get through the next couple of winters before I switch completely to different fuels. I would prefer to burn natural gas rather than coal, but you have to be reasonable. Because some of these suppliers simply are not at the moment. They actually are expecting that the high prices will remain for years to come, which is nonsense. The prices have to be bearable for the customers, both households and the companies. So that's where we are at the moment.
Thank you. Let's dive in a bit more on the natural gas and some of the electricity price caps are being discussed and explored right now. So there's different ways to structure that, of course. We've seen one example with Spain. The way that has been implemented there is that they're still purchasing gas at a market price overall, but by the time it gets to the consumers and by the time it enters into the electricity markets, it is subsidized. So you're still competing on the overall market. Now, that's one way to do that. There's different approaches. You know, EU is exploring a platform, a joint purchasing platform, where they could only maybe buy at a certain level with a certain cap. So in that case, and you kind of addressed the issue a little bit. In that case, if you are telling these joint countries to purchase at a certain cap, does that discourage flows to Europe? And my second question to this would be, we've already seen the natural gas prices going down a little bit, particularly since August. Of course, nowhere near what they were a year and a half ago. We're definitely not at that level. But should the market be allowed to go back, but to fix itself as it's slowly leveling out and absorbing all of these risks, all of these shocks of the last 8 months of the brutal war in Ukraine? And perhaps, is it better to just maybe not implement a lot of these ginormous changes in the markets and instead focus on just direct support for the energy consumers? Because something has to be done. You said, something has to be proposed. Some support system has to be there for the energy consumers, for the industries, and it has to be done right away. There's no waiting around it. So is it better to do direct support, direct payments, versus trying to make ginormous changes on the back end of the market that has overall, until this year, has actually worked quite well, and Europe has made tremendous progress on liberalizing the market and getting rid of the obstacles in the ways that market operates.
Well, we were having a great market for the last 20 years. It's just that that market is gone. And there's a war happening not far from us. And that changed a lot of minds of many people. So to your question, we actually do at the moment, as I said, we do the direct help, let's say, the capping of the prices and the windfall tax, which pay for the subsidies. And in medium term, we will come back to the market saying, look, if you want to supply to Europe, which is still the biggest buyer of natural gas, and if you want to have a long-term contract with us, you have to be reasonable, that's all. And if you don't want to, then we will look elsewhere, or we will just look for different fuels. We're simply not going to pay 300 euro per megawatt hour of natural gas. That's simply ridiculous. The price of the LNG was somewhere around 30, 40 euro per megawatt hour. That seems fair. It could be slightly more, but certainly not hundreds. So that's up to those suppliers, how they see the world. If they expect to have a huge bonanza of natural gas elsewhere in the world, it's up to them. I just don't want to play from the position of weakness, that's all.
Got it. You mentioned not just this winter, next winter, you mentioned next 3 winters, because this is not going to go away in the short term. But let's talk about immediately this winter coming up. There's been some anticipation of a slightly colder beginning to the winter, but then the weather being somewhat moderate. So we'll hope that forecast stands. Of course, there's a huge question around what the Asian markets will be doing if the zero COVID policy will continue. So right now it seems like it would, but who knows what could happen in the next several months. Of course, inflation could also suppress some demand in some areas. But let's look at a scenario where Russia right now is destroying tremendous amounts, over 30% of Ukrainian critical energy infrastructure, really focusing on the electricity, interconnectors, power plants, substations, just a lot of damage to the civilian population and also the energy infrastructure as well. What if there were to either just stop supplies of natural gas through Ukraine, which right now are at 42 BCM currently, plus there's some supplies going through Turkey, but we're talking about Ukraine right now. If they were to halt those 42 BCM supplies or destroy blow up the pipeline network, and then just say, look, we can't deliver unless we do that through the final one string of Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 each have 2 strings, just for the audience. And all the 3 strings have been blown up. One Nord Stream 2 string is still intact, so it never had any gas flowing to Europe through it. But what if Russia destroys the infrastructure or just stops delivering through Ukraine and says the only way you'll get those supplies is through Nord Stream 2 string?
Well, I don't think Nord Stream 2 is coming back to life. It wasn't used ever since it was finished. It will not be used.
But how about reduction? How is Europe prepared to handle reduction of 42 BCM? Is it just going to be further demand destruction and really tough measures?
We imported 155 BCM of Russian gas in 2021, last year. There is no way you could find a supplier of that size free of the market. We understand fully that there are 3 ways to replace that gas. One is savings, very difficult ones, definitely, sometimes similar to the COVID lockdown levels, I would say. Second is different fuel replacement, mostly burning coal instead of natural gas. And only thirdly is getting additional supplies of natural gas, either piped gas from Norway, Algeria, Azerbaijan, or LNG gas from the world. But actually, it will be just 20-25 BCM, probably not much more. So mostly we will get through winter by savings, difficult choices for the governments. And I don't see, with one exception, I don't see any European government willing to talk to Russians at the moment.
Just a reminder to our audience, both online and in person, we will be taking several questions towards the end, so please start kind of thinking about those. I will be calling on you both virtually and here in the audience. So thank you all for joining us today. Let's talk about the calls right now. Some of the voices becoming louder and louder in terms of saying, well, what if we scale back sanctions on Russia and just for a couple of months, get these increased supplies to Europe, and just go back to what the market was a year and a half ago. That's an interesting proposition, but is it really feasible? Is it really realistic to even think that if Russia was to flood, let's say a scenario that Europe does roll back sanctions on Russia and Russia floods the European market with supplies, will we really go back to the prices that we had a year and a half ago?
It's curious. I go to European summits and European councils, and nobody talks about rolling back the sanctions. I come to Washington in the last 3 days. Everybody asks me, "Are you going to roll back the sanctions?" It's like there's a different reality or different
So the unity is
perception.
still
I
there.
would say
Yes.
definitely there is. As I said, there's one European country which is thinking about proposing to lift the sanctions, but that's only one, and the vast majority is simply clear that we need to go on, and we will support Ukraine, and because it's fight for Europe as well, and for ourselves. So the sanctions are not going to go away. And as for flooding the market, well, 3 pipes of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 are blown up, so that's difficult to
Out of the question.
flood the market. Second, psychologically, Western companies still expected Russia to be a reliable supplier. They kept talking about it right until February of this year. Now, for the Czechs or Poles or Lithuanians, that was never a question. But for many Germans, Russia seemed to be the one reliable supplier, and the whole idea of the Wandel durch Handel, the change through common trade, was very, very strong. That's gone. And I think one thing which we should really keep in mind, and which is usually overlooked, September 16th, Friday, 6 o'clock in the morning, the German government took over Rosneft properties in Germany, which everybody talked about Nord Stream 1 and 2, but Russia, in the meantime, through Rosneft, became the second biggest owners of refineries in Germany. And taking over the Rosneft properties in Germany, that was the real divorce between Germany and Russia. And I simply don't see any way back. So, and Germans don't see the way back, by the way. So I don't think that this scenario is actually realistic. At the moment, we're looking forward to replacing every Russian source. We have a clear task from the European Council, from the European Summit of March of this year in Versailles, to replace all Russian oil, natural gas, coal, and nuclear fuel by 2027. I haven't heard anyone proposing something else.
So I'm hearing there's a volatility / toxicity premium on Russian fuel, even if they were to increase their supplies. So the market would react accordingly, right? So thank you. That's one of the tough questions that's been asked. You mentioned a little bit in your answer. There is no going back. Could you talk more about that? What if the war is over tomorrow, which is unlikely? What is the future of Russian fuel in Europe?
The war will not be over tomorrow, unfortunately. So let's ask this question again when the war is finally over. What you can see so far is toughening of the positions on both sides. The way Russia wrote about Europeans in February of this year is different from today. We are basically all, for Russians, we are just perverts and gays and whatever, monsters. Both you Americans and us Europeans. So if you look at the Russian public discourse, it's full of hate. And of course, it will influence how we Europeans look at Russia. So ask me again when the war is over, not today.
Right. Could you talk a little bit more about the future of nuclear supply and making sure that is being protected and being as resilient just as the conversations around oil and natural gas? You mentioned that a little bit in your earlier answer, so I just wanted to zoom in on that just a little bit more, because Russia is still very closely tied to supplying some of the countries in the European Union as well, and in some cases even continuing to build out new nuclear infrastructure. So how do we look at that issue?
Well, first of all, in nuclear area, the whole West slept behind the wheel. It may be surprising to many Americans, but you have no American domestic enrichment of uranium. It's all 100% done by companies from elsewhere. Luckily for you, 80% by European company, Urenco, 20% by Rosatom. The truth is that if you look at two very important steps in the uranium chain, the enrichment and conversion, Russia has more than 40% of the global market through Rosatom and its subsidiaries. And there is now very strong work on both the US and European side to rectify that, but it will take a couple of years. The US enrichment is gone. It's now actually coming back to life slowly, but it will take some time. So focusing just on the fuel fabrication, which is the easiest part of the chain, the step number 6, that's the easy part. Getting uranium enrichment done, the conversion, all of that, that's much more important, and that's actually where the West has plenty of work to do.
Got it. So we touched on natural gas, nuclear a little bit. Let's dive in on oil, so we can get all the key
the easy part.
all the easy parts, right? We have all the answers, right? So with preparing for the ban of seaborne oil coming into Europe on December 5th, and then of course the products in early February. Czech Republic is still, importing some oil, of course. So are the other countries, and that does take a while to ramp down. You don't just, turn it off overnight, right? Could you talk about some of the preparations for this? And another really easy question is the conversation around price caps. Lots of questions around the implementation. How feasible is it? Will Russia play along? If it doesn't, what does that look like for the market?
Well, let's start with price caps. I think the strongest tool the West has, and the European Union has been applying that together with Britain since spring of this year, and now the G7 joined in September, is basically not allowing insurance companies and the shippers to use those capacities for Russian oil. And that led to huge discounts, which especially India and China are getting on Russian crude, up to $40 per barrel, which is very impressive. And in a way, what we want is not to get rid of Russian oil completely from the global market. Russia supplies 1/10 of global oil production, 10 million barrels per day of 100 global production. The aim is to minimize Russian income from the oil. So having China and India a blast with cheap Russian oil is actually not that bad for us. We prefer those money to go to New Delhi and Beijing rather than go to Moscow. So that's about the price cap. That's probably the maximum we can do. What is real interesting, and it's worrying, of course, is the OPEC Plus agreement to lower the production of oil by 2 million barrels per day, the agreement between basically Saudis and Russians recently. We will see whether there is actually a second step from this duo, Saudi-Russia, early next year, because the cutting down of or banning Russian supplies of oil through tankers on December 5th will be the easy part. The difficult part is February the 5th, when the products export from Russia is stopped to the EU. And that will be a moment of vulnerability for us. That's why the agreement on the 6th package of sanctions came in June, but it's only coming into force in December and February next year, because the oil companies basically told us we can do anything, but we need about 6 months to arrange the logistics. Sure. So if there is a fundamental change to oil markets in the meantime, let's say from another production decrease by Saudis and Russians, the OPEC Plus, there will be a fundamental change, both for the US and for Europe.
Thank you. We have a virtual question here from Alice Wells from Exxon. Given Orban's public opposition to further energy sanctions, do you foresee difficulties in securing consensus on implementing, the price caps on Russian crude proposed by G7? Hungary in the past has received some exemptions on some of the previous sanction packages. Was that a precedent that will continue being set?
We have managed to keep the unity of the EU 27 since February of this year, since the start of the war. There are some voices, and there is one country which is strongly against new sanctions. That's true. At the same time, in the end, it always agreed to them. So we will see how it goes in the future. I think it's easy when you go to Moscow to visit, to promise some tough action back in Europe. But then when you sit at the European table, it might be a very different perspective.
Got it.
And economically, Russia is a pygmy. European Union is much stronger, and you need European Union. Even if you're just a relatively medium-sized member state, you need European Union much more than you need Russia.
Exactly. I want to check in to see if we have any questions from the in-person audience. Oh, we do have one from Phil.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bartuška, for your comments. I wanted to go back a little bit to the OPEC Plus cut a couple of weeks ago. It's been seen here from a political perspective, but in fact, since the OPEC Plus cut, prices have fallen. Do you think that the market is failing to recognize the cutoff that you're talking about of products later this year, early next year? Or do you think that, in fact, the Middle East producers are viewing the market correctly in the sense that demand is going to fall off with a recessionary pressure later?
Okay. Thank you. I've spoken to president of one of the biggest oil companies in the world just 2 days before the OPEC Plus agreement. And he was expecting 4 million barrels per day cut. So I think that some of the market reaction to the cut of only 2 million barrels per day was basically relief. In the same time, if those 2 million barrels come later on, let's say in January next year, it's going to be something that the market will definitely understand and see. So it was a relatively small step in the end, not as big as we expected, but it's still substantial. And I think the basic fact that Russia and Saudis could agree on that should be the one thing which we should pay attention to in Brussels, in Washington, D.C., and elsewhere in the West.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience? Otherwise, I definitely have a whole other list of questions for you myself. So let's talk about additional ways that United States can support all of these efforts and help Europe mitigate the crisis. Obviously, we've seen record levels of LNG, and the transatlantic relationship has been at its peak, actually the opposite of what Putin was trying to achieve with his brutality in Ukraine and his alienation of the market. So what are some additional, your top wish list of opportunities that U.S. and Europe, EU, and also direct member states can work together?
It's not a wish list. It's just a small thing which I think is worth mentioning. And I'm speaking to the LNG suppliers in the U.S. or the oil companies in the U.S. in the last couple of days, they were rather envious when I said that. The first LNG terminal opened in Europe, the new one, is in Eemshaven in Holland, which was opened on September 8th. Yep. Actually, Czech Republic acquired a share of 3 BCM in that terminal early in June this year. And the terminal was, the decision to build it was made in March of this year, and the terminal was opened September 8th. Because Holland, just like Germany and other EU member states, have postponed many of the environmental limitations on building new infrastructure. The whole approval process today is about 1 month. When you say that in the US, it sounds incredible. Even in Texas, which is usually a very free state in many areas. So perhaps this could be something to look at in some of your countries or some of your states. Could be interesting. But I think for Europe, the war in Ukraine is something that makes us think about the limitations we put on ourselves. So the legal limitations. The permitting process is one of them. We make things very, very diplomatic, very bureaucratic, very slow. Of course, that's not what you have in the US, definitely not. But in Europe, we do have bureaucracy. And it can be very slow, painfully slow. So the fact that you see already the LNG terminals being up and running this year, the ones approved in February, March, April of this year, and you will have plenty of them running next year, 2023, that's impressive.
Yeah, unprecedented speed. I mean, it's incredible. We do have a question from Landon.
Morning, Mr. Ambassador. We're 2 weeks away from the climate conference, COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Obviously, in the context of the crisis in Europe, the energy crisis globally, just curious the European sentiment, your sentiment in terms of how the current crisis is impacting both near-term and long-term thinking around also another crisis, which is the climate crisis.
Okay, well, short answer would be that, of course, this and a couple of next winters, we will burn much more coal than we ever expected, and we will probably not meet the CO2 targets this or next winter. In the same time, the switch to non-fossil fuels will be faster than we expected because the winners of the situation are savings, efficiency, renewables, and nuclear. Those are the 4 winners. At high prices of electricity makes savings simply a reasonable thing. We had electricity price around 20 euro per megawatt hour. Savings were not as economically interesting. We have price of 200. It's a different story. In the same time, I must say that I do expect a showdown in Sharm el-Sheikh between the West and the developing world. I was recently in Senegal because it's one of the possible new energy suppliers for Europe and also a chair of the African Union this year. And I have met a couple of ministers, and then the president, Macky Sall, expressed his wish to see me. And I got 2 hours of very open discussion with him, very frank. He was basically saying, look, you Europeans with those Americans asked us in Glasgow last year to don't burn any coal and don't drill for oil and gas, keep it in the ground. And now you come to me and you say you want this gas for you. How come? What's happening? By the way, he said, I have in my country 40% of people with no electricity. So I will drill for gas and I will drill for oil because I need to bring power to my people. And that's something that you cannot really disprove. I mean, that's clear. So we should expect that many countries will not be berated by the West in Sharm el-Sheikh, and rightly so. in the same time, I think that we can have a positive example that to say, look, yes, we will burn much more coal next couple of years. At the same time, we will accelerate the switch to non-fossil fuels. But I think much less preaching from the West would be helpful this year in Sharm el-Sheikh. You know, much less fingers pointing at somebody who's not really meeting his CO2 targets, because in the end, we will not meet them either in Europe, definitely. And let's be honest about it.
Thank you. Andras has a question. Microphone.
Oh, here's the microphone. Ambassador, good to see you again. Love to ask so many questions. I'd love to ask you about the European reaction to the IRA. But the one question I want to ask really is, the United States is urging Europe to build out its LNG infrastructure, to speed up the pipeline, building the pipelines, the interconnectors, et cetera, et cetera. When you talk to the U.S. counterparts, are you urging the United States to do the same at home? Are you urging the United States to build out its own infrastructure so that we can provide more gas to Europe? And I just want to be a salesman for a really good article written yesterday by Ambassador Morningstar and Joe Webster about exactly this topic. We're in it together, and I think this conversation has to be a conversation where we both make a contribution. Thank you.
Kirsten, thank you very much. Look, the sense of urgency is different on both sides of the Atlantic. A small example, my colleague, our Czech ambassador here in Washington, was just recently invited to a trip for the EU ambassadors to Pennsylvania to see the drilling, the fracking for natural gas, and the production which can be increased for Europe. And the ambassadors asked, so where will be the terminal, in Pennsylvania or New Jersey on the way to Europe? And they said, no, we have to build a pipeline from Pennsylvania to Texas, because you cannot build an LNG terminal in Pennsylvania or New Jersey. You have to do it in Texas. Which is a sentence which you simply in Europe would not hear. You know, the Netherlands needed an LNG terminal, it's built. It will not be built, it's already built. It was open on September 8th. Germany needs LNG terminals, they'll be open next year. So this sort of decisiveness is actually very, very new in Europe. We really scrapped a lot of the limitations, and the permitting period is much, much shorter. There's much more willingness of public figures to actually go openly against those who want to hinder the process. You know, two people to watch, the former co-chairs of the Green Party in Germany, who are today, the lady is Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the gentleman, Mr. Habeck, is Minister of Industry. Look at them, the way they talk about the need to build fossil infrastructure. And they're not happy about it. They just say, look, we need to get it done. The same, actually, my Minister of Foreign Affairs of Czech Republic is a pirate, you know, which is usually a very green party. But of course, I mean, at the moment, we need things to be done and get them done. So I think the sense of urgency is very strong on the European side. We'd be happy to see similar sense on your side.
So we covered oil, gas, nuclear, and a little bit on renewables, and we can go back to those later. Energy efficiency. So it's a bit surprising that, you know, over the last month, you know, we haven't really seen as robust of an investment in energy efficiencies as we would have anticipated, kind of with the level of crisis that Europe is facing right now. And it's not just Europe. In the United States overall, there's tons and tons and tons of opportunities to improve the way energy is produced, transmitted, utilized, right? So as you talked about the next 3 years and paying attention to how tough these years will be, immediate measures, midterm, long-term measures. Of course, energy efficiency is the best when you don't notice it, where your quality of life stays the same or is improved, right? Where you're not making sacrifices, where you can still, you know, continue utilizing, you know, the things that make your life and the quality of life that it is. So could you talk about some of the, you know, building envelopes or heat pumps or some of the other things being implemented across Europe, or not, and what are the barriers?
Well, the heat pumps belong to the renewables area in our understanding. I think the savings and the renewables are the easiest ones to deploy and the easiest to explain. Yeah. As for the efficiency measures, that will usually take some time to implement, so those are not the ones which will get you through this winter. In the same time, there is actually plenty of investment for that. And by the way, for example, in our case, we are a good example of the efficiency measures, how helpful they could be. Our maximum demand in winter used to be around 60 million cubic meters per day, 60 MCM, on the coldest days. And now, thanks to the wrapping the houses in the polyester and basically,
Yeah.
we have the maximum demand around 45 to 50 million cubic meters per day. And usually it's actually lower. So it does make sense, and actually people do understand that savings make sense. At the same time, you will not make them overnight. You will first need to implement direct, immediate measures, like the permitting period being shortened for new construction, like allowing thermostations and heating stations to use heavy heating oil or coal instead of natural gas, and so forth. The efficiency will definitely come, the savings as well, but you look at it from the perspective of somebody who's very, very calm. We are not that calm. We understand that the winter will be rather interesting, to put it mildly. And you need to make sure to the public that you're doing your utmost to keep the country warm. So efficiency will definitely come on as a topic, but we have to get through this winter. I think if you invite me again in March or April next year, if my country is still standing, I think it will, we can discuss other measures, but now we have to get through this winter.
I look forward to that conversation in March, and I'm sure it will be. Let's expand this conversation to renewables a little bit. Andras touched on the IRA, opportunities for cooperation on streamlining some of the regulatory environments and kind of best lessons learned from on each side of the Atlantic. And also the supply chain, just kind of paying attention to that. If there's going to be this big ramp up of renewable investments, what are some bottlenecks and how do we address them?
Well, there's definitely a very deep look in Europe at the suppliers of crucial materials for renewables. Mm-hmm. We do not want to fall into a new dependency. To replace Moscow for Beijing is nobody's wish. Or to be dependent on a country which produces 2/3 of global cobalt, Congo, and so forth. So when you look at the European Raw Materials Initiative and what the governments of the big member states are doing at the moment is we go through the supply chain and through the raw materials we need. Mm-hmm. And we are much more cautious about where do we get it from. And this could be actually in the end an interesting clash between some renewables and the national security people. Mm. Because if you have something that's being 100% made in China with raw materials which are fully controlled by Chinese state, the level of dependency for any sort of replacement or repairs, that will be something to discuss. Yeah, you will see Europe once we get through this. We will see Europe much more looking at the security risks of new technologies and so forth, national security risks.
Got it. All because we don't have enough challenges that we're dealing with at the same time, right? Let's pivot to Ukraine. So we're seeing just tremendous, horrific things just happening across Ukraine, both on a humanitarian side, but also on infrastructure. And we talked about this earlier on a lot of critical energy infrastructure being destroyed or damaged. Recovery for Ukraine and kind of looking into the future ways that Ukraine can actually contribute to European energy security through its clean energy exports and other interconnections and other ways, being kind of this innovation hub for newer technologies. Could you talk through, while Europe is dealing with this crisis right now, could you also kind of talk through how these plans or how these conversations are happening?
I love your optimism and long-termness. Look, we first have to help Ukraine to win.
Of course.
That's the most important thing. So I think weapons at the moment are more important than energy initiatives, to be quite honest. We're trying to help Ukrainian people to get through the winter. We actually have huge support from governments and the NGOs of Europe to heat what's remaining of the houses and so forth. But let's be honest, war will decide how Ukraine will look like, how the whole space will look like. So at the moment, it's more a question for my colleagues from the military than for me, honestly.
But I would say, on the immediate side right now, especially in the in eastern Ukraine, where people are losing access to electricity, access to water, this is a humanitarian crisis in the making if they don't get the proper level of support. And a lot of it is happening already. But if they don't get it fast enough to fix some of the things that they can fix in a couple of days, some of these will take much longer to fix, particularly on the power plants. But on the immediate critical energy infrastructure, I would argue actually ties into military operations as well in some ways. I'm not a military expert, don't claim to be, but there is that connection as well. So in terms of the urgent support for for the damaged infrastructure. Could you talk more about how that's going?
Look, I was in Kiev recently, and when every single day there was an air raid, and you have to admire the calmness of the people who remain sipping their coffees on the street and just don't run anywhere. And even more, you have to admire those who are in the east of Ukraine, which is even having it tougher. And I have a huge respect for those from European countries and NGOs who actually go there and help people there. We have one of the biggest Czech NGOs, one of the biggest global NGOs. It's called People in Need. It's a Czech foundation which has been in Afghanistan, in Iraq, everywhere. I mean, those are people who are fearless. So they're in eastern Ukraine and helping there. And we will have plenty of projects. We do have plenty of projects for the east of Ukraine as well as for the center. But until the war is over, it's basically just you're trying to repair windows or a roof of the house which is being bombed or shot at. So it's rather thankless tasks at times, I think.
All right. Well, we are coming closer to the end of the event, unfortunately. So I want to make sure that you have plenty of opportunities for some closing statements or your final remarks, anything that we didn't address today that you feel like should be mentioned that's really important.
I'd like to end on an optimistic note, and I think we should. This is a replay of 1973, of the oil shock. In October 1973, OPEC countries shut down or limited the export of oil to the West, hoping that it will force the West to stop supporting Israel and also to pay much more for oil. And it was difficult, no doubt about it. The recession, long lines for gasoline and diesel in the US and in Europe. It also brought plenty of changes. In Germany, they banned driving cars on Sundays. In the US, there was a limit on speed, which I think is still in place in many places. But in the end, the West has won, not OPEC. The price of oil crashed, and the Indian Soviet Union died in 1991 because there was simply not enough money for oil. And I think that this will be similar. The idea that Europe, which is one of the most advanced and rich parts of the world, would succumb to a rather backward country which does nothing but produce raw materials and death, that's simply unfathomable for me. We will win, we will prevail. Russia will lose. That's as simple as that. It will take some time, it will be difficult. I think we're much more resilient than we tend to think. If I would tell you 3 years ago that Americans and Europeans would be locked down at their homes for months on end and schools would be shut down, you would say, well, the country would just fall apart. No, it did not. We went through COVID and we're still relatively sane, I think. we managed. We will manage this one as well. It will be difficult, it will be bloody, especially for Ukrainians, but we will prevail. So I'm rather optimistic. It will be a difficult winter and the following 2 months as well, but we will win.
I love that optimistic note. It will be difficult, it won't be cheap, but it will be worth it, right? Ambassador Bartuška, it's just such an honor to host you here today. I look forward to your next visit to DC. I will actually be in the Czech Republic in November, so hopefully we'll get a chance to see each other soon. I'd like to thank our in-person audience. I'd like to thank our virtual audience for joining us today. All of this will be available on our social media, Atlantic Council website, YouTube. So please share this timely conversation with your colleagues. Make sure to reshare on social media. I also want to thank our fantastic team here that made this happen. Patty, Elena, Laura, Martin, Graham, and Jasper. Thank you all for your hard work. And of course, Ambassador Morningstar for your fantastic opening remarks. It was a true pleasure. And thank you again, Ambassador Bartuška. This is an honor.
Thank you. Thank you.